Samuel Ortiz had worked inside the tall glass building of Harrington Dynamics for so many years that he sometimes felt like a small piece of the architecture itself. Every morning he walked through the revolving doors before the sun was fully up, wearing the same dark blue uniform and carrying the same slow, steady pace. Employees hurried around him with their eyes glued to phones or screens, but nobody really looked at him. It didn't bother him anymore. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Samuel liked quiet. He liked doing simple things well. Sweeping the floors, wiping down glass walls, emptying trash bins. These were tasks that gave him a sense of rhythm. Some people needed excitement in their days. Samuel preferred something steady. Even so, there were times he wished someone would at least notice the care he put into his work. Harrington Dynamics was a massive company, famous for creating new technology that promised to shape the future. People talked about it on the news every week. The man behind it all, Elliot Harrington, was known as a brilliant billionaire who built the company from almost nothing. Workers spoke about him with a mix of fear and admiration. Samuel had never seen him up close. He only caught glimpses during big events when security rushed around the building. On most days, the building felt like a world moving too fast for someone like Samuel. Still, he had grown familiar with every floor, every hallway, and every little sound the machines made late at night. Because he worked the early morning and late evening shifts, he often overheard conversations most people didn't. Deliveries, late meetings, hurried phone calls, none of it was meant for him. But his quiet presence made him almost invisible. One morning, as he pushed his cleaning cart into the main lobby, he noticed workers whispering in tight groups. They didn't usually talk much before 9, so their energy felt different, nervous, rushed, uncertain. "There's too much riding on this launch," one person murmured. "If this fails, we're finished," said another. Samuel didn't try to listen, but the conversations floated around him like pieces of a puzzle. Something big was happening, bigger than usual. A security guard he knew, a friendly man named Trevor, walked by and gave him a nod. "Morning, Samuel," Trevor said. "Morning," Samuel replied. Trevor leaned in slightly. "Big week. You'll probably see people sprinting through the halls for a while. More than usual?" Samuel joked, "Way more," Trevor said with a grin before heading on his way. Samuel continued wiping down the sleek white counters, wondering what could be so important. He knew Harrington Dynamics changed the world every time they released a new invention. But the pressure he sensed today felt heavier. He moved to the elevator and pressed the button for the research floor. That floor was always the quietest in the morning. When he arrived, the hallways were empty except for a few tired engineers clutching coffee cups. Computers hummed behind glass walls. The air smelled faintly of metal and warm circuits. Samuel liked starting his shift here. It gave him space to think. As he cleaned along the corridor, he heard 2 engineers talking inside a nearby lab. Their voices sounded tense. "We can't let this slip again," one said. "We won't. We just need the final tests done in time," the other replied. "If the investors don't see progress, it's over. It's over." The word echoed in Samuel's mind longer than he expected. It wasn't fear he felt, more like curiosity mixed with a faint sense of worry. People here rarely talked about failure. Everything was always polished, confident, unshakable. But today something felt different. When his shift ended, he walked out into the sunlight, thinking about the conversations he heard. He never got involved in company matters. He didn't see himself as someone who could make a difference beyond keeping the building clean. But he had a strange feeling growing inside him. Like the beginning of a storm he could sense before anyone else noticed. After a small lunch at a cafe near the building, he returned for his evening shift. He preferred the evening to the morning. The halls were quieter, the lights softer. Most workers were gone by then, except for a few who stayed late. As he rolled his cart toward the research labs again, he noticed something odd. A door that was normally closed and locked stood slightly open. A thin strip of cold blue light spilled into the hallway. Samuel hesitated. He wasn't supposed to go into rooms without clear permission. But if the door was left open, he needed to make sure nothing was wrong. It was part of his job. He gently pushed the door wider. Inside, The room was empty, but the computers were active. Screens flickered with lines of code, changing too fast for the eye to follow. Samuel stood still, listening. The room felt different tonight. There was a low, pulsing sound from the machines, almost like a heartbeat. He stepped closer. The largest screen displayed a pattern of symbols flashing in red. He didn't understand everything, but he recognized something. Many years ago, long before he became a janitor, Samuel had studied computer engineering. He never finished his degree. Life had pulled him in a different direction. One that involved supporting his family instead of finishing school. Still, some things stayed with him. He stared at the red symbols. Something about them didn't look normal. They weren't random. They looked like the kind of damage caused by someone trying to break into a system. A warning message blinked on the screen. Unauthorized access detected. Samuel stepped back. This wasn't something he should touch. He looked around the room, wondering who had been here before him and why they left in such a hurry. He turned to leave. But as he reached the doorway, he heard footsteps down the hall. An engineer walked past, barely glancing at him. "Sir," Samuel called out. The engineer paused. "Yes." "I think something's wrong with the system in there," Samuel said. "Maybe someone should check it." The engineer sighed, clearly exhausted. "Probably just a glitch. It happens during long tests." "Don't worry about it," Samuel nodded slowly, though his gut told him it wasn't just a glitch. After the engineer walked away, Samuel stood in the hallway for a moment, thinking. He wasn't sure what he should do. He was just the janitor. People didn't take him seriously when it came to technical things. But that warning message stayed in his mind. He resumed cleaning the floors. Though his thoughts kept drifting back to the open door and the red symbols flashing like tiny alarms, something about the whole situation made his chest feel tight. Later that night, as he prepared to go home, he passed by the lab again. The door was now closed and locked the way it should be. The hallway was silent. Samuel paused. Staring at the door, he didn't know it yet. Not clearly, but this small moment, this tiny worry in the back of his mind, would soon pull him into the center of something far bigger than he ever imagined. And even though nobody in the building noticed him, the fate of the entire company was slowly beginning to rest in his quiet, steady hands. The next morning, Samuel arrived earlier than usual. Something inside him wouldn't let go of the red warning he saw on the screen last night. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. Usually the soft hum of computers and the distant sound of elevators filled the hallways, but today it felt heavier. He pushed his cleaning cart slowly, listening for any unusual sounds. As he reached the research labs, he noticed the engineers had arrived. They were already huddled in small groups, whispering and pointing at screens. Samuel kept his distance, pretending to be busy with his mop and bucket, but he couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation. "It's happening again," one engineer muttered. "We have to fix it before the investors see the demo." Another replied, "If the system crashes now, it could ruin everything." The words confirmed his worry. Something serious was going on, and it wasn't just a small glitch. His mind went back to the red symbols on the screen. He had a feeling that what he saw last night was connected to these problems. He walked down a hallway that led to the server room. He had never entered this room before. It was always locked, but he knew the layout well from years of working here. He stopped at the door and noticed that, once again, it was slightly ajar. His heart beat faster. Carefully, he pushed it open. Inside, the room was dimly lit. Rows of servers hummed like machines breathing. The air was warm, and the faint smell of electronics filled his nose. On the largest screen, the same red symbols flashed intermittently. Samuel took a step closer and studied them. They weren't random. Someone was deliberately causing errors. He could see the pattern, the same mistakes repeated in different places. Almost as if someone wanted the system to fail. He crouched down to get a closer look at the server connections. His fingers moved instinctively, checking cables and ports. Despite being a janitor for years, Samuel still remembered enough about computers to notice when something was off. He realized that someone was tampering with the main system from inside the building. not an outside hacker, someone they all trusted. As he examined the setup, he heard footsteps behind him. He quickly stood up and saw a young engineer approaching. "What are you doing in here?" the engineer asked, frowning. Samuel straightened. "I just wanted to make sure nothing was broken. I noticed the door open this morning." The engineer sighed, clearly annoyed. "This is a restricted area. Only certified staff can be in here." "I understand," Samuel said calmly. "I just thought you should know that the system is showing some errors." The engineer shook his head. "We've got it under control. You should stick to your cleaning." Samuel nodded, though he couldn't shake the unease inside him. He left the room quietly and continued his cleaning. But every few minutes he found himself glancing back at the server room, worried that the errors might get worse. He couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if the system failed during the launch. Back in the hallway, Samuel noticed a small office door slightly open. He peeked inside and saw a senior developer hunched over a laptop. The man's fingers moved quickly, typing commands that Samuel didn't fully understand, but he could tell they were unusual. The developer looked stressed, muttering to himself about timelines and deadlines. Samuel's instincts told him to leave. But curiosity got the better of him. He stepped closer and accidentally knocked over a small trash bin. The developer jumped, startled. "Oh, it's you," the man said, glancing up. "I didn't see you there. I just noticed some unusual activity on the system," Samuel said cautiously. "Is everything okay?" The developer paused, then forced a smile. Yes, it's fine. Just a small technical hiccup. Nothing to worry about." Samuel didn't press further. He nodded and returned to his cleaning. But the encounter left him uneasy. Something about the man's eyes, the way he avoided looking directly at him, made Samuel suspect that the problems were deeper than anyone was admitting. Throughout the day, Samuel moved from floor to floor, performing his duties. But his mind was never fully on the cleaning. Every sound, every whisper, every glimpse of activity made him more aware that the company was on the edge of something critical. He overheard engineers discussing failed simulations, frustrated managers asking why the system wasn't stable, and interns worrying about deadlines. During his lunch break, Samuel sat on a bench outside the building, staring at the clouds. He tried to make sense of what he had seen. He wasn't part of the technical team. Nobody would take him seriously if he raised concerns. Yet he felt a strange sense of responsibility. If the system failed, the consequences would be enormous. Jobs could be lost, investors could pull out, and the company could collapse. He thought about his own family, who depended on him. He wanted to believe that his life was just sweeping floors and emptying bins. But deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore what he had seen. There was a problem, and it was bigger than anyone realized. After lunch, Samuel returned to the building. The afternoon passed in a blur of mopping, dusting, and wiping. But every few minutes, he found himself drifting toward the research labs, drawn by the need to see for himself. He stayed mostly in the background, watching, listening, noticing details that others overlooked. As evening approached, the building grew quieter. Many employees had left, leaving only a skeleton crew. Samuel moved through the hallways with his cleaning cart, ears tuned for any unusual sound. When he reached the lab where he had seen the senior developer earlier, he noticed that the office door was closed. He paused, then quietly opened it. Inside, the developer was gone. The laptop sat on the desk, but the screen displayed a message Samuel didn't recognize. He stepped closer, squinting at the text. It looked like commands, instructions, and lines of corrupted code. Samuel felt a rush of realization. This wasn't an accident or a small glitch. Someone was deliberately sabotaging the system. Samuel's heart raced. He knew he couldn't just walk away. He had studied computers enough to understand that if these commands weren't stopped, the system could collapse completely during the launch. He didn't know who was responsible, but he knew he had to act. He spent the next hour observing, taking mental notes of the patterns in the corrupted code. His mind worked fast, piecing together what he could do to counter it. He didn't have all the answers, but he understood enough to see that the sabotage could be reversed, at least temporarily. If he moved quickly, he might prevent a disaster. By the time the last employees left for the day, Samuel had made a plan. He would work late into the night, using the knowledge he still had from his years of studying computers. It was risky. He wasn't officially part of the tech team, and if anyone caught him, he could be in serious trouble. But the thought of the company failing, the people losing their jobs, and the world missing this important launch pushed him forward. He rolled his cart to the server room one last time, careful not to make a sound. Inside, the servers glowed softly in the dim light. Samuel knelt in front of the main console, his fingers moving over the keyboard as he entered commands. He worked quietly, methodically following the patterns he had observed. Every line of code he adjusted felt like a small victory, but he knew it wasn't enough yet. Hours passed. The building was silent, except for the hum of the servers. Samuel's hands ached, his eyes strained, but he didn't stop. He continued to analyze, correct, and stabilize the system. Bit by bit, the errors decreased. The red symbols that had haunted him all day began to fade. By the time the first light of dawn touched the building, Samuel leaned back, exhausted but relieved. The immediate threat was gone, at least for now. The system was stable enough for the launch, and the worst of the sabotage had been undone. He knew there was still more work to be done, and the person responsible remained at large. But for tonight, the company had been saved from disaster. As he pushed his cart toward the exit, Samuel felt a strange mix of pride and fear. Nobody had noticed what he had done. To them, he was still just the janitor. Yet he knew he had made a difference, even if silently. And deep down, he sensed that this was only the beginning of something much larger. Something that would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Samuel returned to the building the next evening with a heavy sense of purpose. The events of the previous night still lingered in his mind. He knew the sabotage he had stopped temporarily was only a small part of the problem. There was still someone inside the company working against them, and the launch was only a few days away. The thought of failure weighed on him, but it also gave him a strange energy he had never felt before. As he wheeled his cleaning cart down the main hallway, he noticed that the employees were unusually tense. People were moving faster, talking in hushed voices, and casting nervous glances at the screens. Samuel's eyes followed their movements, absorbing every detail. Even though he was not part of the team, he had learned to read the atmosphere. The building itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. He passed by the break room and overheard two engineers speaking in low tones. "I don't know how this keeps happening," one said. "The system keeps getting corrupted, and nobody can figure out why. We have to make sure the prototype works for the launch," the other replied. "If it fails, it's not just our jobs. The whole company could go under." Samuel nodded silently as he moved on. He couldn't intervene directly, but he could observe. He had started noticing patterns at specific times when the errors appeared, certain systems that were repeatedly affected. Each detail gave him a clearer picture of what was happening. When he reached the server room, the door was slightly open again. Samuel's pulse quickened. He knew he had to check it. Slowly, he pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of the monitors. The red symbols he had seen before flashed intermittently on the screens. His stomach tightened. The sabotage had not stopped it, had only slowed. Samuel crouched in front of the console, analyzing the code. He recognized the same patterns from before, but now they were more complex. Whoever was behind this had become more careful, hiding their tracks better. Samuel took a deep breath. He didn't have a choice. If he didn't act, the launch could fail. The consequences would be catastrophic. He began working, entering commands with precise care. His hands moved quickly, guided by years of knowledge he thought he had left behind. Line by line, he corrected errors, patched weaknesses, and stabilized the system as best he could. It was exhausting work, but he felt a sense of focus he hadn't felt in years. Hours passed. Samuel could feel his strength waning, but he kept going. Every few minutes, he paused to listen for sounds in the hallway. He didn't want to be caught by someone who might question him. He was still just a janitor, invisible to most. But in this moment, he carried a responsibility far beyond his job description. Late into the night, Samuel noticed movement on the other side of the room. A shadow shifted near the far console. His heart pounded. He realized someone else was here, watching him. He didn't know if they had noticed what he was doing, but he couldn't let his guard down. Who's there? He called softly. The shadow moved closer, revealing a man Samuel had seen before, a senior developer, the same one who had acted strangely a few days ago. The man's eyes darted nervously and his hands trembled. "I didn't expect anyone here," the man stammered. Samuel straightened. "I'm just making sure the system is working properly. There have been problems." The man hesitated, then muttered, "Problems? Yes, but it's complicated. We're under a lot of pressure. The launch. If it fails?" His voice trailed off. Samuel studied him carefully. Something about the man's tone and expression told him that this wasn't just about mistakes. This was deliberate. "You're causing these errors," Samuel said quietly. "I saw the patterns. It's not accidental." The developer froze, and for a moment there was silence. Then he shook his head. I can't let it succeed. Not like this. If the company releases this product, people will get hurt. The investors don't care about the risks. I can't just stand by." Samuel listened, his mind racing. "But sabotaging the system isn't the way to protect people," he said gently. "If it fails during the launch, the damage will be worse. You're putting everyone at risk." The man looked down, conflicted. Samuel realized that underneath the sabotage, there was fear and frustration. He wasn't dealing with a criminal. He was dealing with someone who believed they were doing the right thing. "Look," Samuel continued, "I don't know everything about this system, but I know enough to fix it temporarily. If you help me, we can stabilize it for the launch. Then we can find a way to address the risks without destroying the company." The developer's eyes met Samuel's. For a moment, there was hesitation, then a slow nod. "All right," he said, "but we have to be careful. If anyone notices..." Samuel smiled faintly. "I've learned to be quiet." Together, they worked through the night. Samuel guided the developer, showing him where the errors were and how to correct them. They moved quickly, checking each system, ensuring that no more lines of corrupted code remained. Samuel's hands flew over the keyboard, but he also kept an eye on the developer, sensing his mood and adjusting instructions accordingly. By the time dawn approached, the system was stable. The red symbols had disappeared, replaced by the familiar green lights indicating everything was functioning properly. Samuel leaned back, exhausted but relieved. The immediate danger had been averted. The developer looked at Samuel with a mixture of gratitude and awe. I can't believe you did this," he said quietly. "I never thought a janitor would understand enough to help like this." Samuel shrugged. "I'm just someone who notices things. And I care." The developer nodded. "We'll need to be vigilant from now on. The launch is coming, and there's still a lot at stake," Samuel agreed. He knew the days ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he felt that he wasn't just invisible. He had a role that mattered, even if nobody else recognized it. After leaving the server room, Samuel continued his cleaning duties, moving through the building with a renewed sense of purpose. He smiled faintly at the employees he passed, though they didn't notice him. To them, he was still just the janitor. But inside, he carried the knowledge that he had helped prevent a disaster. Later that morning, as the building buzzed with activity, Samuel overheard conversations about the launch. Engineers discussed timelines, managers worried about investor meetings, and everyone seemed on edge. Samuel moved quietly, taking note of each concern, storing information in his mind like pieces of a puzzle throughout the day. He made small observations that would help him later who had access to certain systems. Which areas were more vulnerable and which employees seemed unusually stressed. Every detail mattered. He didn't know yet when or how he would use this information, but he knew it would be important. By the evening, the building had quieted again. Samuel returned to the server room for a final check before heading home. The system was still stable, but he knew the threat wasn't gone. Whoever had caused the errors could try again. And he had to be ready. He worked late into the night, double-checking code, monitoring systems, and ensuring that no new problems had appeared. His body ached, and his eyes burned from staring at the screens, but he pushed through the fatigue. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a responsibility he had chosen to take on, as he finally pushed his cart toward the exit. Samuel felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. He had prevented the sabotage from causing immediate damage, gained the reluctant trust of the developer, and gathered valuable information about the internal workings of the system. He had stepped out of the shadows, even if only a little, and had made a difference when nobody else could. Walking out into the cool night air, he paused for a moment and looked up at the stars. For the first time, he felt that he was part of something larger than himself. The company, the launch, and the people working late inside all depended on more than just luck. They depended on him and the choices he had made. Samuel knew coming days would be even more challenging. The launch was close, and the stakes were higher than ever. But he also knew that he had the skills, the determination, and the awareness to face whatever came next. And as he walked toward home, tired but resolute, he felt a quiet confidence that he could meet the challenges ahead, no matter how impossible they seemed. The night before the launch, Samuel returned to the building with a sense of both urgency and quiet determination. Every hallway, every light, and every sound seemed sharper tonight, as if the building itself was aware of what hung in the balance. Samuel pushed his cleaning cart down the familiar corridors, but tonight he barely looked at it. His mind was occupied with the system he had been protecting for the past few days and the invisible threat that could still disrupt it at any moment. The building was mostly empty. Except for a few engineers working late, their faces tense and eyes glued to screens. Samuel moved carefully, cleaning in the background but paying close attention to everything. He noticed which doors were locked, which computers were active, and who lingered near critical systems. His observations were becoming a map in his mind, a way to anticipate problems before they happened. As he passed the server room, he saw the door slightly open again. His pulse quickened. He knew the system was stable now, but he couldn't ignore the possibility of new sabotage. Steeling himself, he entered the room quietly. The servers hummed softly, their lights green and steady. Samuel crouched at the main console, reviewing lines of code. Everything looked correct, but he didn't let his guard down. He had learned that threats often hid in small details. Suddenly, a noise behind him made him turn. The senior developer he had worked with the previous night stood in the doorway, eyes wide. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "I thought you were gone," Samuel said softly. "I needed to make sure everything is ready," the developer replied. "We don't have much time left. The launch is tomorrow, and if anything fails now..." His voice trailed off. Samuel nodded. "I understand, but we can't rush. One wrong move could ruin everything. Let's check the system together." For hours, they worked side by side. Samuel guided the developer through the system, pointing out areas that needed monitoring and reinforcing security where the errors had appeared before. The developer followed his instructions carefully, typing commands and watching the screens for any unusual activity. Each correction, each adjustment, was like a small step toward a goal that felt enormous in its weight. As the hours passed, Samuel noticed a pattern in the corrupted lines of code. It seemed that the sabotage was designed to activate just before the launch, a final strike to ensure failure. He realized that the saboteur had been patient, waiting until the moment of maximum impact. The thought made him tense, but it also sharpened his focus. "You know," Samuel said quietly, "whoever did this isn't finished. They're waiting for the launch. We need a plan for that moment." The developer nodded, his face grim. "I know, I've seen their work. It's clever, but it can be countered if we're ready. We just need to be alert." Together, they devised a strategy. Samuel would monitor the system during the launch, ready to make corrections the moment any errors appeared. The developer would stay in the lab, maintaining the system and watching for signs of sabotage. It was risky, but it was the only way to protect the launch. As dawn approached, Samuel finally allowed himself a brief rest. He sat on a chair in the server room, rubbing his tired eyes. The building was silent, save for the steady hum of the machines. Despite the exhaustion, he felt a sense of readiness he had never experienced before. Tomorrow, everything would be tested. The launch, the system. and their efforts would either succeed or fail. When the first light of morning touched the building, Samuel returned to his usual routine, sweeping floors and emptying trash bins, blending in with the employees preparing for the launch. Nobody noticed him as he moved through the hallways, but he didn't mind. He was invisible by design, watching, listening, and waiting. Hours later, the launch was set to begin. The conference room was filled with executives, investors, and media personnel. Elliot Harrington, the Billionaire CEO, stood at the front, his expression a mixture of excitement and tension. Samuel, meanwhile, was in the server room, eyes glued to the screens. The red warning symbols he had feared were nowhere to be seen, replaced by steady green lights. The launch commenced. The prototype came online, and for a brief moment, everything appeared flawless. The room filled with applause, but Samuel didn't relax. He knew that the saboteur could strike at any second. He monitored the system closely, ready to act the moment something went wrong. Minutes passed. And then, almost as if on cue, an alert flashed on one of the screens. A line of code was corrupted, threatening to disrupt the entire system. Samuel's hands moved quickly, entering commands, reversing the corruption, and stabilizing the system. The alert disappeared, replaced by the reassuring green light. He glanced at the developer, who gave him a small nod. They were both aware that this was just the first challenge. The saboteur was still out there, but they had bought enough time to keep the launch on track. Throughout the presentation, Samuel continued to monitor the system, making minor adjustments whenever necessary. Each time an alert appeared, he corrected it swiftly, ensuring that the prototype functioned perfectly. The people in the conference room had no idea how close they had come to disaster. To them, everything was seamless, flawless, and impressive. To Samuel, it was a delicate balance maintained by hours of unseen work and constant vigilance. As the demonstration concluded, Elliot Harrington addressed the audience, highlighting the revolutionary technology and its potential impact. The applause was thunderous, the media eager to report on the success. Samuel allowed himself a small smile. He had done it. The system had held, the launch had succeeded, and the company was safe for now. After the audience had left and the conference room emptied, Samuel stayed behind in the server room with the developer. Both of them were exhausted, bodies aching, eyes strained. They had prevented disaster, but the tension lingered. "We did it," the developer said quietly, leaning against the desk. "I never thought we'd make it." Samuel nodded. "We did what we had to do. But we have to stay alert. There's still a chance the saboteur will try again." The developer smiled faintly. "You've been incredible. I didn't think anyone could do what you did. Not just a janitor, but someone who truly understood the system and acted when it mattered." Samuel shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I just noticed what others didn't. I did what I had to do." As the day ended and the building grew quiet again, Samuel walked through the halls one last time. The launch was over, the system stable, and the immediate danger had passed. But he knew that his work was far from finished. He had stepped into a role that few would ever understand, and he carried a responsibility that weighed heavily on him. He paused in the main lobby, looking around at the familiar surroundings. The floors gleamed, the lights shone brightly, and the building seemed alive with the energy of success. Yet Samuel knew that beneath the polished surface, there were challenges that remained hidden. The saboteur, the risks, and the future of the company, all of it, depended on vigilance, knowledge, and courage. As he pushed his cleaning cart toward the exit, Samuel felt a quiet pride. He had saved the company at the last moment, using skills and instincts that nobody else recognized. The employees and executives remained unaware of his actions, but he didn't need their recognition. The satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference, of having protected something larger than himself, was enough. Stepping outside into the cool evening air, Samuel took a deep breath. The sky was clear, and the city lights sparkled in the distance. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what the future might hold, not just as a janitor, but as someone who could make a real difference. He knew challenges would come again, that danger might return. But he also knew that he was capable of facing it. And as he walked home, tired but resolute, he carried with him the knowledge that tonight, He had changed the course of events. The billionaire's company had been saved. Not by a high-powered executive or a team of engineers, but by a quiet, determined man who refused to be invisible when it mattered most. The morning after the launch, the building felt different. There was an energy in the air, a mixture of relief, pride, and exhaustion. Samuel Ortiz arrived early, as always, pushing his cart quietly through the main lobby. The floors were shiny, reflecting the bright sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. For once it seemed that everyone had a little more time to breathe, to smile, and to feel the weight of the successful launch lift off their shoulders. Samuel moved through the hallways, performing his usual duties, but he could feel eyes on him now. Though not in the way he expected, some employees nodded as he passed, giving polite smiles that carried a new warmth. He didn't think much of it. After all, nobody truly knew what he had done. He was still the janitor, invisible in many ways, yet somehow present in every room. By late morning, the executives began gathering in a large meeting room. The buzz of conversation was subdued but full of excitement. Investors were calling, media outlets were sending inquiries, and every department was being congratulated for their part in the launch. The atmosphere was electric, but Samuel stayed at the back, quietly cleaning a corner near the door unnoticed. Then Elliot Harrington himself entered the room. The billionaire CEO moved with purpose, his presence commanding attention even without words. Samuel had seen him before in passing, a figure almost untouchable, but today Elliot's eyes scanned the room differently. They lingered briefly, not on the engineers or the managers, but on Samuel. Standing quietly in the back with his mop, something shifted in the air. Elliot approached him slowly, and Samuel instinctively straightened, unsure what to expect. "Samuel," Elliot said, his voice steady, but carrying an unmistakable tone of admiration. "May I have a word with you?" Samuel blinked, surprised. "Of course, sir," he replied softly. Elliot led him to a small office nearby, away from the crowd. The door closed behind them, and for a moment, Samuel felt the full weight of the moment. He wasn't sure what Elliot knew or what he expected from him. "I've been hearing reports from several teams," Elliot began, "about unusual activity during the launch, errors that appeared and were corrected immediately. And then I was told that someone noticed and acted before things could go wrong. That person, Samuel, was you." Samuel's heart raced. I just did what I thought was right, sir," he said quietly. "I didn't expect anyone to notice." Elliot studied him, his expression serious but not angry. Most people wouldn't have even tried. They would have waited for someone else to notice, or assumed it was none of their business. "You didn't. You took responsibility when it mattered, and you saved the company." Samuel felt a lump in his throat. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said. I couldn't let it fail." Elliot nodded slowly. "That's exactly why it mattered. We're going to investigate fully, and the person responsible for the sabotage will be held accountable. But you, Samuel, need to know something. You have a skill and a dedication that is rare. We cannot ignore it." Samuel listened quietly, unsure of what to say. He had never imagined that his work, his quiet vigilance, would ever be recognized in this way. The thought was overwhelming, yet comforting. "We want to offer you a new role," Elliot continued. "A role where you can use your knowledge, your instincts, and your dedication. We will provide training, resources, and full authority. You won't be invisible anymore. You'll be a vital part of the team that keeps this company safe from internal threats and external ones alike." He had spent years as a janitor, proud of the work he did, but never imagining that it could lead to something like this. A new role, recognition, the ability to make a difference beyond cleaning floors. It was almost unbelievable. "I don't know what to say," Samuel finally whispered. "Say yes," Elliot replied with a small smile. "We need someone who notices what others overlook, someone who takes responsibility when no one else will. You've proven that, Samuel." After a long pause, Samuel nodded. "Yes," he said, his voice steady now, filled with determination. "I'll do it." Elliot shook his hand firmly. "Good. Welcome to the team in a new way. You've earned it." The next few days were a whirlwind of changes. Samuel's new role was formalized, and he was given access to secure areas of the building, systems that had previously been off-limits, and training to sharpen his skills. He worked alongside engineers and security teams, learning quickly and applying his instincts to prevent potential failures before they could happen. For the first time, he felt fully part of something larger than himself, and the feeling was empowering. Meanwhile, the investigation into the sabotage continued. The senior developer who had initially caused the disruption confessed fully, explaining his fears and frustrations. He had intended to prevent harm, but had acted in the wrong way. With Samuel's guidance, the company implemented better safety measures and protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. The outcome was fair, and the lessons learned strengthened the company rather than weakening it. Despite the whirlwind of activity, Samuel maintained his quiet demeanor. He still walked the halls with his cart, still cleaned the floors. But now he did so with the confidence of someone who knew that his observations and actions mattered. Employees who had once ignored him now gave him nods of respect. Some even stopped to ask questions about his insights on the system. Samuel answered calmly, never boasting, just sharing knowledge when needed. One evening, after a long day of monitoring systems and checking protocols, Samuel walked through the halls of the building, reflecting on everything that had happened. The launch had succeeded. The company was safe. The saboteur had been addressed, and new measures were in place to prevent future issues. And he, a man who had once felt invisible, had played a crucial role.